Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Remember about a year ago when people were saying that AI is going to replace developers? That didn't really pan out, not quite true. So then it turned to, well, AI is not going to replace you, but somebody using AI will replace you. And that's not really true either. The way I see it is, you are not going to be replaced by somebody using AI. You're going to be replaced by somebody who does not need to use AI, but is still using AI to do that same job. Let me tell you a little story. About 3, 4, 5 months ago now, I started a position as a senior software engineer at a small startup in the San Francisco Bay Area. I work with TypeScript, Next.js, SQL, MongoDB, Tailwind. Cool kid stuff, a lot of the same stuff that we teach at Parsity. By the way, you should join now because capacity is reaching the maximum. And I'll have some big updates on Parsity in the very near future that I cannot wait to reveal to you, along with a partnership with a very, very special person that I want to reveal as well. Anyway, I'm working there and we have an in-office policy. 1 day a week, we go into the office. I actually volunteered to come into the office. No one actually wanted me to come into the office at first. They said, you don't need to. And I thought, it'd be kind of cool. I want to see these people. I want to meet my coworkers. There's only 7 of us at this startup. Super, super small, right? So I go into the office. I'm sitting directly next to the CEO, the head of the whole company, right? No pressure, right? So I'm coding and I'm using ChatGPT to style some stuff. So I'm posting tons of code into ChatGPT and I'm copying and I'm pasting it here and I'm doing all this stuff. The CEO looks over and he says, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I shrugged and I was like, "I'm trying to get this design to match what's on the screen. I'm not really good at styling. So what I do a lot of times is I'll pump my code into ChatGPT. I'll get a screenshot of the Figma file. Figma, by the way, is like the design tool that everybody uses to create mockups or examples of what the UI, the user interface, the site should look like. I'm not super good at that stuff. And so I'm using ChatGPT to basically do it for me, right? And he was like, "Oh, that's really cool. I didn't even know you could do that." And the designer was also like, "Oh, wow, that's nuts. I didn't know you could actually put code in there and it would give you back working code." I'm like, well, it's not quite working, right? But it's close enough. It gets me something to start with. And I really hate doing tedious stuff like that. If I'm looking at some really difficult UI to craft or something that I just don't want to spend time doing because I want to work on the logic, this is a full stack application. So I have back-end things to do. I have some front-end things to do. I have a lot of JavaScript stuff to do. I don't necessarily want to spend all that time wrestling with Tailwind and styling. So I'll have ChatGPT do as much of that as I can. And maybe you thought the CEO would look over and be like, "Well, why do I need you? You're out of here. You're fired. ChatGPT, you're hired." Didn't work out like that, right? And do you know why? I'm not blindly copying and pasting random AI-generated code. I'm using it in a strategic way. And this brings me to a very key point. Too many early career developers are falling into a very dangerous trap, one that I fell into years ago before ChatGPT was around. It's the copy-paste model. One time at my first company I joined, I was looking up some code on Stack Overflow, and I copied it directly into our code base without ever thinking how this would scale or work or anything. I knew it worked exactly in that moment. I'm like, cool, this works right now. It broke, right? It broke when it was in production, when users are using it. I'm sitting there with my manager the day that this big critical issue is happening, and he's looking at the code and he's like, "What is this thing supposed to do right here? What is this line of code supposed to be doing? What do you think this is doing?" I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. I copied some code. It was like jQuery or something like that. It was like a few lines of code. It wasn't some massive amount of code, but I didn't really understand how it worked. He didn't really either. He's not a front-end person. And so we both kind of just stared there. He's like, "If you don't know how this works, then why is it in the code base?" Very, very embarrassing moment for me as a developer. I had to just admit, I copied and pasted this. It worked. I didn't think that it would break. And now here I am learning a very embarrassing lesson in front of him. I didn't get fired that day either, but I thought it was. I thought, well, this is it for me. I think I'm getting fired. I thought this dozens of times throughout my career, but it taught me a super valuable lesson in that moment. Do not copy and paste code that you don't understand. It's totally fine to copy and paste code. I do it all the time, like all the time. but I make sure I understand exactly what that code is doing, or at least high level understand what that code is doing to avoid really embarrassing situations like that. And not only to avoid the embarrassing situations, but because it's just doing your due diligence as a software developer. The code you write can impact people's lives. People might be trying to do their jobs. People might be operating some machinery. There might be airlines or flights or pacemakers, or who knows where your JavaScript code will eventually run. You want to make sure it actually works. And God forbid if something bad does actually happen, you want to be able to make sure that you can fix it, identify the situation, and come up with a solution. So if you're using ChatGPT, please don't fall into that copy-paste trap. I want to give you a few ways that I know will help you out and some ways that I actually use AI at work on a daily basis.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the show. Now, let me be clear. Learning how to code is not easy. It's even harder now with so much information about how you should be studying, what you should be learning, and the reality of the job market. Getting a job requires an entirely different skill set than learning how to code. You need both to succeed. At Parsity, we work with you one-on-one in a very small setting. We will only take 60 people per year to coach them from zero through hired. The reality is, if you're a career changer, you need that personalization to help you with your individual problems and your local job market. If you want to work with me and my team, go to parsity.io. If you want more information, just schedule a call with me by clicking on the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode.
So the first one we went over already, styling stuff. If you don't like CSS, you don't have to. I think CSS is awesome, and I think there are some people that are really, really good at it. And there used to be more of a clear divide between front-end developers or UI developers and back-end or full-stack developers. Nowadays, that line is completely blurred. I think you have some people that are firmly in the back end and some people that are full stack, and you have way less people that are doing UI developer work. It doesn't exist in the same magnitude that it used to even a few years ago. I've done some episodes on this. You can look up Stack Overflow and the surveys that they've done, and we see the trend is front-end developers are slowly decreasing. And that trend will probably pick up more. Doesn't mean we're not styling websites. We still need to have beautiful looking sites. And things like Tailwind or Bootstrap, Material, UI, Ant-D, these are all really, really popular libraries that make styling things much easier. I still don't really like styling stuff because it takes a long time. When I'm estimating my work, in fact, I will sometimes get a whole day. I'll say it'll take me a full day at least to style something that's moderately complex. I'm not talking about animations or anything like that. I'm talking about what you would see on a normal home page that needs to be mobile responsive, meaning you put it into a mobile view, it looks good. You put it into a really big desktop, it looks good too. That could take me a full day if I'm starting from scratch. So in order to do that faster, what I'll do is I'll take a screenshot, I'll paste it into ChatGPT, I'll get my code, I'll paste that into ChatGPT, and I'll say, please make this mobile responsive and try to match the design as closely as possible. Once it gives me something back, I'll then play with that and get better and better and better. And then I'll take small pieces of that and I'll break it down section by section. I'll say, okay, the hero section doesn't look quite right. Maybe try to do that again. Or maybe this like footer doesn't look quite right. Try to do that again. And then I will also need to feed it pretty specific examples. It's not enough to just say, make it look like this. It's like, I need this to be in 3 columns and the columns need to have breakpoints. So then when it gets to this width of the screen size, it shuffles so that the columns are now under each other in rows. That's a much better prompt that's going to help ChatGPT give you much better code that probably satisfies what you're looking for a lot more than just make it look like this. It's not usually enough. So give it some very detailed prompts and you'll probably get a much better result. The next thing I use it for is really, really important, especially because I work remote for most of the time and we're a really small team. So I work with the head of engineering and another person who lives in a different time zone. So it's not always easy to just pair up or meet in the office and say, hey, can we go over this problem real quick? And if you're a junior person, you got hired as a junior, maybe you're at a coding boot camp, or maybe you're at Parsity and you're listening to this. When you're working on something and it's unfamiliar, you can basically use ChatGPT as a sounding board. People used to call this rubber ducking. Back in the days, you'd go to somebody's desk at an office and they'd have a little rubber duck. And they would tell their code to this rubber duck. It was kind of a joke, but it was a real benefit this could bring. They'd go to this little rubber duck and they'd say, this code is doing this. And they just kind of talk out loud to their duck. And they realized that when they just verbalized what they were doing, they'd often come to epiphanies. They'd be like, oh, That's why this isn't working. Thank God for that little rubber duck. Well, now you don't need to look like a weirdo talking to a rubber duck. Geez, are software developers just weird people? Could you imagine this in a marketing organization? Somebody with a rubber duck talking to their rubber duck. That wouldn't fly. Only software engineers can get away with weird stuff like this. Anyways, now with ChatGPT, you don't need to talk to a little rubber ducky. You can just say, hey, does this make sense? I'm thinking of doing this. Look at this code. Does this make sense how I'm doing this? Do you have any other ways I could potentially do this? What are some potential issues with me doing this? So if you're ever a little unsure, if you're writing something complex or it's mission critical, or you're thinking, this just feels a little weird, just ask ChatGPT. It's not going to give you some groundbreaking answer. It gives you the most mundane, boring, average answer there is, but that's okay because most of the code you're writing is trying to do average things. It's trying to query a database. It's trying to manipulate something in the document object model. It's trying to do something that's been done hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of times. So you don't need a groundbreaking answer. You just need to know, hey, does this make sense? Am I doing this thing in a generally right way? If you're doing something really weird, it'll tell you. And if you're doing something really weird, then you should have the confidence that that is the thing you should be doing. Because sometimes ChatGPT will tell me, oh, you shouldn't do it this way because this won't scale to like X many thousands of users, or this SQL database query is really slow. And I don't care, we're at a startup. So I'm like, okay, we have like 100 users or 1,000 users or maybe 100,000 users. This is not a big deal here. We're going to iterate on this and just get something out the door. Speed is what we're optimizing for at my startup. If you're working at IBM, you're probably not optimizing for the speed of how fast you can get it done. You're probably optimizing for how does this scale to hundreds of millions or even billions of users. So it's basically like having a second opinion that you can just get on demand, which is really, really cool. Now, you might think that because I speak on this show, I do a ton of writing, that maybe I can be really clear when I'm speaking about technical things to non-technical people. Maybe you think, I bet Brian is really good at communication. And you'd be partially right. I've learned how to be better at it from years and years of practice, but sometimes I have trouble just speaking to non-technical people about a super technical thing. For example, maybe the CEO or somebody at work, somebody high up there saying, hey, Brian, you released a change today. Can you tell me what exactly that change was? Somebody in legal is asking about what you just did. And I'm like, well, I had to partition the database and add a constraint on this particular field so that people couldn't put duplicate entries for keys that match to their profile. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I saying? Why am I saying that? What am I saying? And then they're looking at me like, what are you saying? Right? And what would have been better is if you can just go to ChatGPT and just say, here's what I've done. Can you summarize this in a way that non-technical people can understand? Remember, if you're working remote, it's rare that you're just talking to your coworkers in a shared space. Most of what you're going to do, most of your communication is going to be written. So in order to write well and make sure people understand you, it's important you use a language and a way of speaking that's clear. And a lot of times that's not your strong suit as a developer. It's certainly not my strong suit. I've had to learn how to get better at it over the years, but it still doesn't come naturally to me. And maybe English isn't your first language. This is when it's really, really helpful to summarize complex concepts. You can then just dump out maybe even code that you've written and say, can you summarize what this code does to a non-technical person so they can relay that information to the legal department? That's an excellent use of ChatGPT to do that. It can refine what you're thinking, organize it, and make it just really boring language that everybody can understand that works well in a corporate environment. Lastly, I use ChatGPT a ton for code reviews. I review the head of engineering code sometimes, and he's way above me as far as skill level. He's just really, really good. He was up there at Amazon. The guy is, one of those genius type dudes that works at startups that ends up making the startup really accelerate in what they're doing. He's one of those guys, right? I'm not at that level. I don't know if I'll ever be at that level. So when I'm reviewing his code, I rely on ChatGPT sometimes to tell me if I'm right in my intuition. Because sometimes I'll read code that he writes and I'll think, something about this feels a little off. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not also a TypeScript expert, so I'm learning TypeScript at the same time that I'm working here. He knows much more because he's been working in this code base for much longer, and he's just a much more senior engineer than I am. So when I'm looking at his code, I want to support my claims by just getting a different opinion saying, hey, is there a better way to do this? Is there a pitfall in here? Can you explain this in a way that makes sense to somebody? Or can you explain this code to me? I think it does X, Y, and Z. Is that accurate? So sometimes I just say what I think and say, hey, was that? And it's like, no, that's actually completely wrong. You didn't understand this at all, you dummy. But luckily, ChatGPT doesn't talk to you like that. I bet that thing that Elon Musk created, I bet that large language model would probably call me a dummy. ChatGPT, on the other hand, pretty nice. So super helpful for doing these code reviews. And then sometimes I can actually find things that I wouldn't have normally found and offer suggestions that I normally wouldn't have been able to come up with on my own. Now, here's the bottom line. None of this would be really possible if I didn't already know how to code, create software, and have some intuition for what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. If I was blindly copying and pasting like I've seen people do, in fact, I worked with somebody that did this a few years ago. They were just copying and pasting stuff from Stack Overflow. And then when ChatGPT came out, I was working with a mentee, and this person was working at a startup as well. And they were just copying and pasting everything. It was pretty wild because they did get a lot of work done, but it was super clear to me they didn't understand even the minimum of how to write code without ChatGPT. They knew some really basics of JavaScript, in my opinion, but they didn't know things like, how do you write this query? How does this React component work? How do you use state and use effect? Just really basic stuff. And I'm like, this is a little scary because as soon as ChatGPT goes down, well, there goes their productivity, right? I mean, they might as well just call off the day. Or what about when the thing breaks or they have to extend it or do anything? They're going to be in some crazy loop of like asking ChatGPT a million times to solve the problem. I've been there too. One time, just as a test, I was trying to rewrite some code for Parsity. It was some really boring, trivial code to look through a Excel sheet and then pull out some data and then transfer it to a database. I spent literally 3 hours doing this. If I had done it on my own, it would have taken about an hour. But I was so frustrated because I was so close with the ChatGPT that it was getting me so close there that I kept like asking it, reprompting it, asking over and over. I'm like, no, this isn't quite right. Here's a bug now. Here's a bug now. Here's a bug. And it just got into this vicious loop. And 3 hours later, I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I just write this on my own? And that is the big issue if you're over-relying on ChatGPT. So no, this is not going to replace programmers. In fact, it's not even going to replace bad programmers. But if you're just using it and you think you can build a full app or even a basic app using ChatGPT, I challenge you to do so. You have to know some level of coding, and the more complex it is, the much more knowledge you're going to have, or else you're going to leave a huge mess for other people to clean up later. And yes, it will bite you in the end. Please don't fall into that trap. So I actually credit a large chunk of my productivity to using ChatGPT and Copilot and all the other tiny AI tools that are just kind of integrated into my workflow now. I even have one, Amazon, I think Q-Bar, that's in my terminal. I'm using AI wherever I can, not to offload all of my thinking, but to just help me move faster. In fact, when I got my review after spending 3 months at this startup, I got complimented for working at really fast speed. That was a really nice compliment. And I owe a lot of that to using AI tools to do that. So if you're earlier in your career, don't copy and paste your way to mediocrity or even below mediocrity. Use it to enhance your thinking, refine your skills, and become a better developer who's fast and effective. Because at the end of the day, the best developers aren't just the ones who know how to use AI. They're the ones that can deliver great work with or without it. Hope that's helpful, and I'll see you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you're serious about switching careers and becoming a software developer and building complex software and want to work directly with me and my team, go to Parsity.io. And if you want more information, feel free to schedule a chat by just clicking the link in the show notes. See you next week.